All right, that should do it.
So I think we're all set to go.
And all right, we are all set to go.
All right. Well, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is just 5:33 p.m. on June 15th. It's a special meeting of the Historic District Commission, and I am the chair, Richard Youngkin. And we'll start with a roll call. Linda Stedman,
Present.
Shanti Underhagen,
Present.
Murray Gates,
Present.
Andrew Martinez is not here, and Karen De Silva.
I am here.
Terrific. And Richard Youngkin, of course, I'm here. So the first item, number 3, that we should get to is the approval of the April 5th minute. No, excuse me. We've got the wrong date here. The April 28th minutes. And do we have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Is there a second?
A second.
Is there any, that's from Linda Stedman, a second. Is there any discussion of the minutes? I think they were very well prepared. Thank you, Brian.
I just had one comment on, let's see, 5A. Toward the end, so page 2, the second full paragraph that begins, a discussion ensued between the applicants and the HDC. I know at one point during the meeting, Andy Tights also weighed in pretty firmly about the responsibility of owners. I don't know if it was here or if it's later, was later in the minutes, but I didn't see it noted. And I think it would be important to have that noted. I think it was here. I mean, I don't think this is where that discussion was happening. Or maybe
I think that was later on in the minutes.
Okay. Maybe
I
I'm-
believe I saw it. Maybe under the balustrade. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he specifically was the one who said this will result in the disclosure of a lot of personal financial information. And I think it would be important that we note that if it isn't already here.
Yeah, I believe you're correct, Shanti, and that probably occurred before the motion took place. So it could be added before Mr. Callahan questioned. Before that,
Yeah.
would be before he questions how the demolition of historic. I think it
Yeah.
happened before that, where Mr. Tights said that there would be a lot of review of financial data required to talk about a hardship.
Right.
And perhaps it can be just as simple as what I just said.
I can go back and look at the recording.
Yeah.
And make that correction if it's in there.
Yeah, that would be, do we have, what do we need to do? Have an amended, a motion that describes that?
Well, I mean, we can either, table it to the next meeting and wait for the change, or we can, there would need to be, at this point, there would need to be an amended motion to approve it with that correction.
I'd be inclined to do the amendment and have it be, conditioned upon confirmation of that comment by the town solicitor.
Okay, why don't we do that? We'll have, would somebody like to make that amended motion?
I think Shanti just did.
Shanti
We need a
just did.
we need a second of the amended motion.
All right.
I'll second the amended motion.
Okay, Linda,
Okay.
thank you. So with that, I think before we take a vote, I just want to say that Andrew has joined the meeting. And Andrew, we're discussing the minutes. I know that you've just popped in. We have a motion on the floor. So do you want to add anything to this discussion before we vote?
No.
Okay, good. So I think we're ready for a vote then. So I'll do a roll call vote. Linda?
Aye.
Shanti Underhagen?
Aye.
Murray Gates?
Aye.
Andrew Martinez?
Aye.
And Karen? So Richard, yes. So all ayes. Thank you. So the next order of business, put the minutes aside, is old business, and we have none. So we can get right to why we're all here today, really, and that's the new business, the discussion of items that we may be thinking of for work outside of our project review. And the first item is 5A, implementation of historic and cultural resources element of the 2021 comprehensive plan. And I don't need to read this whole thing, I think, but we really want sort of a discussion around the room here of actions to implement elements of the plan that fall within the HDC purview. And I think you all have probably looked up the comp plan, the link that Brian provided for the resources element on historic, and also the implementation plan for the historic section. So with that introduction, I think I should just open it to the floor here and hear what you all would like to prioritize. I think possibly we look at the short-term items, but maybe the midterm as well, or any of the items. And does that sound like a good way to go about this? I know, Murray, you wanted to have this discussion largely. Does that sound good to you? Just sort of.
It does, yeah. I wouldn't mind just a quick update from Brian on where the comprehensive plan sits in terms of its approval process.
Okay, that's a good.
Well, it was enacted by the town council and now needs to go up to the State Office of Planning for their approval. To the best of my knowledge, it's sitting in the queue. Well, no, excuse me. Last I knew, the planning director had a couple of fairly minor amendments to make based on the town council's approval. And then it was to go up to the state. I'm not sure exactly where that stands right now.
Right. And I don't think
But
those amendments had anything to do with historic, did they, Brian? Or,
No.
So with that, why don't we start with Linda, and we'll sort of go around our room on the screen and see what people have to say about any of these things. Grab you as things to work on, as items of interest.
I really don't know right now. No, just start with somebody else. I would appreciate it.
Okay. Why don't we start then with Murray? Murray has been very interested in this. Murray, you're muted.
Probably easier to say what's not of interest to me. But I will point out some of the things that come to mind most readily, and things that we as a community have been following for quite some time, and that probably starts off with the survey. So understanding where we as a community stand in terms of our historic resources. And I think most of you know that the last time that the survey was updated was in the early to mid 1980s. So essentially there's an entire generation of architecture or part of the built environment, which is now subject to being a historical and cultural resource. there's a lot out there, and things that have disappeared as well. So if I were to throw out perhaps what is most important to me, it's probably that.
Anybody else on that topic?
I agree, 100%, absolutely.
I as well.
Really necessary,
Right.
good work.
And I will add to that. I talked to Carol Baker in our office, our GIS magician, about updating this in a format that we can add some layers to the GIS system right now. If you look at the historic resources element and the map that is included in that, it falls well short of identifying all of the properties or structures in the resource. I mean, basically, it notes structures that are on the register, districts that are on the register, scenic roads and vistas, but we don't have a structure by structure. And in speaking to her this afternoon, she said that, you know, helping to get this all into a GIS database would be a great internship project if anybody is aware of or has those kinds of connections to find anybody interested in working on a historic district internship over the summer.
Great.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We have the CLG grants available to us. We've missed a cycle, but another cycle will come up within 6 months, I believe, or 8 months. And that might be a worthy project to apply for. We have to think it through a little bit. The State Historical Preservation Commission layers, GIS layers for historic resources. I'm not sure Carol would be able to tell us how exact they might be in terms of location. The State Preservation Commission was behind everybody else in the GIS inventory, but I don't know if they've caught up or not. And of course, that's the existing inventory, right, Murray? It's not what we would want necessarily for the end product, because it doesn't include sort of the reevaluation. I want to let you know that the South County History Center, that would be the jail, Petaquamscut, formerly Petaquamscut Historical, they were commissioned, 1772 Foundation gave them some money to update the survey in Kingston for us, for the Historic District Commission, so that we would have much more detailed information about all of those resources, including the outbuildings and landscape features and whatever they could lay their hands on in terms of historical photographs. That's just one little survey effort, though, and it does not include you know, the vast area of South Kingstown outside of the Kingston Historic District. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's some efforts have been thought about in the Tunic. There might be alliances with other organizations like the Land Trust that we could partner with. Be neat to involve you know, other groups in town in the effort.
That's what I was thinking. I'm on page 197. And so this could potentially be boiling the ocean where you don't really make an impact. And to your point, Richard, I went to like the large mill complexes, because those are nicely done. They're in use. And I also went to bullet 5, which is the historic landscapes and farms. And I immediately thought of the Land Trust. And I just wonder if you kind of point it to a Matunic community or a village, and pilot something where you're partnering with another organization, and it's very pointed in how we might take that and replicate it, right? Maybe to another village, to Peacedale or to the mill complexes.
Hmm.
But that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I've done these surveys myself. Shanti, you've probably done them too,
Yeah.
right? They're involved, and they're very interesting because usually they're young people, young interns. I did it when I first got involved in historic preservation 40 years ago. So I was young and I was able to be outside all day with a clipboard and a camera, and and get paid next to nothing to do it. So that's the kind of, you don't hire an expensive consultant to do this stuff necessarily, especially if it's the basic kind of survey work. It's low paid job, but that's not to say that we couldn't get something unusual going that's more sort of grassroots or home based. There was an effort started in Matunic with an organization called the Matunic Preservation Society. It's a very small, loosely knit group of individuals that are connected with a Hale House. And they had thought about a survey of Matunic and didn't get off the ground with it. But they were going to do that with the Preserve Rhode Island as a conduit for funding. So that there is something out there. It's very incomplete at the moment in terms of where it's not going anywhere actually at the moment. But it was based upon those Matunic landscapes, just exactly what you said, Karen. Which is it's sort of exciting for some funders down in that area to consider, some private individuals who are interested in the land trust and also in preserving the character of Matunic.
One of the things,
Go ahead, Marie.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Rich. One of the things that I've been thinking about, and I love the idea of doing it perhaps at a village level, but the survey itself is just a tool, and the tool, unless it's used and appreciated, serves very little purpose. One of the things that I've been thinking about is how we engage the people in the survey process as wide as audience as possible, because as a result of this survey work, we could gain not only creating this wonderful tool and reference material, but also gaining a better appreciation. That's one of the ultimate things we want to do, right? Preservation is best served when we have a community that believes in preservation. Some might say that we don't have that today, but there's ample room for improvement. So are there other use cases of building surveys or updating surveys by using social media, for example? I always think of this wonderful resource that we have in town called, it's a Facebook site, for those of you that use Facebook, called the South Kingstown Narragansett Memories. I'm a light user of Facebook, but I'm a heavy user and very involved with this South Kingstown Narragansett Memories page, because it is exactly what I think we need in this town. It's people that share their recollections, often of places, sometimes of people, but it is this really binding community of probably 6,000 Facebook users that either live here or did live here and share memories. It's really a neat site. But using something like that to gather information that could contribute to the survey. It could be, I'm not sure how you'd structure it, but it could be address-based or village-based, and just getting people to provide their anecdotal information on, on the built environment. That would just be an input into a survey. I'm not discrediting what professional consultants do. They've got their role, but I think it can be complemented, as you said, from a grassroots perspective.
Well, Shanti, do you have any experience with sort of alternative surveys that weren't so structured by the state historic preservation offices?
I do not. I was actually going to ask you if it was still the SHPO's position as it used to be in Rhode Island, and I don't know what it currently is, because we've obviously had a change of leadership over the last few years, but longstanding, Rhode Island did not like anybody else to do the survey but the state office, right? So,
Yeah.
and think that's why we don't have really good updates, because once all those survey documents were done, everything kind of paused, and there's been some work.
Well, we could certainly do some research on other places where surveys have been done more organically than
Yeah.
from a grassroots level. Yeah, the state had its list of, I was one of them, list of consultants that they preferred. And we actually were trained to do this the Rhode Island survey, which is different than the Maine survey or the New York
Right.
State survey or the Connecticut survey.
Right.
All of the states have sort of evolved their own methodology for survey work. And Rhode Island's was kind of like brief. I mean, it doesn't match what New York does or Maine does
Right.
or Connecticut does or even Massachusetts. It's weird. It's kind of survey actually that doesn't require a huge amount of in-depth research. So
Right.
it's adaptable. One of the things that in terms of the secondary product that you want to think about is to have the state kind of recognize what you're doing so that when all the information can get launched up to them. So when they do a project review under the State Preservation Act, let's say there's a highway project or a state infrastructure project, and you've uncovered through this grassroots survey an important resource, we would want the state to recognize that effort and to put that property into their database so that they could take it seriously in reviewing one of these projects that might have an impact. And so it's kind of a balancing act. But I think that if I've done this with the state in the past, experimenting with digital databases, experimenting with alternative survey products, and was able to I was successful in having them recognize the work. It was difficult, but it can be done. That as a side, I think Murray's thought of a grassroots effort is very cool because I think in my experience, it did generate, whenever I did these survey projects in other communities in New England or New York State, there always was upwelling of interest and excitement among the homeowners and among the people that I would meet outside. And you did generate some education and discussion about the value of the properties, and they in turn sort of became proud of what we were they were proud if they got sort of inventoried.
And it's a great education tool as well. I want to give you just one example from this Facebook site, just to give you something to think about. There was a post about the PCL Elementary School when they first started renovating that, and all of a sudden people were coming out on all different angles. Some of them saying, "Wow, I can't wait to see what they're doing." A lot of them saying, "What are they doing with this great site that's been part of my life all my life?" You know, they're changing it, and also referencing what can be done to preserve it. Well, how do we stop them so that they don't, tear apart this wonderful resource that we have? And you could see how much they know and how much they don't know about our role and about others that are involved in preservation. So it was just a really, it struck me as being a great place to be able to share information. And your wife, I don't know you're a user, but your wife was involved in clearing up some of the misconceptions about preservation.
I'll have to ask her about that. So, so this is this. I like this. This is. I think we should bookmark this as a key thing that we could get involved in. Now, how could it segue to like a plaque program or another? I know it segues really nicely into education on all levels, because you can do sort of something with the newspaper or on the social media about what this is all about. And then you can include the links to all the other cool stuff about tax credits or things that we can help with in terms of design review or resources to buy, things to fix your house with, that kind of stuff. So I think that's really could be positive. It could also, a result could be that we actually come up with information for the plaque program. I know that wayfinding signs and plaques had been part of a discussion for maybe a midterm or something a little bit later, but I had heard too that there was an interest on the part of the town and the EDC, the Economic Development Commission, for a plaquing program, some kind of simple plaque program. Did you hear anything about that, Brian?
Yeah, when the manager asked the EDC to put forward some ideas for spending the COVID relief money, one of them was or a couple of them were around, wayfinding and plaques and village ID sorts of things. And the department heads have been working on, weeding out things on the list because they got about $80 million worth of suggestions for $9 million worth of relief funds. But those things were on the list last time I saw it. Whether or not they've continued to survive the vetting process, I'm not sure. Based on a conversation I had with the planning director this morning, I believe they are still on the list. So there may be money available for that sooner rather than later.
Does it make sense for us to put a motion on the table to endorse it? To have the commission send an endorsement to the planning board to say this is something that we would endorse?
Well, it's not the planning board that's going to make the decision. It's going to be the town council, I think, who's ultimately going to decide how this money is spent. And that's at this point, the way I understand the system that's been set up, is that the town manager has been working with the department heads to put together a recommended list to forward on to the council. So if the HDC wanted to send a letter to the planning director or our new acting town manager, in support of some of these things, I can certainly do that on the commission's behalf.
Yeah, I think that might be an excellent thing to do. If we could say something about the plaquing program and also the inventory, the research or whatever, obviously a plaquing program requires a little bit of research, particularly if those buildings aren't already in the inventory itself. Not that it would require a huge amount, but simply that it's a great way to get this education going. I think we could put together a letter, maybe, how should we do that? Just have a general vote from the commission, that a motion and a vote that this is something we should pursue, and comment to the town council on, and then Brian and I can work on that letter.
Yeah, I think just a general vote in support of, whatever, a plaquing program, a wayfinding program, a village ID program, however you want to classify it. And then, yeah, I can draft a letter, Richard, and send it to you, and you can sign off on it if, include that in the motion, and we'll move that along.
Right. Well, maybe I'll ask for a motion there. Let's move this. Let's get this part going, because I think we have other interests too on the part of other commissions for this. Do I have a motion for anybody?
All right, I can make a motion that the HDC draft a letter to be sent to the town council and copied to the planning board with our support for an investment in a town placking or wayfinding program. And also, this is subject to amendment if you'd like, and also an investment in a update to the town's architectural survey.
Yeah, historical and architectural survey.
Historical.
I mean, in terms of the COVID relief funds, you know, an update to the survey is not something that was included in the list that's gone forward. So you're adding new items at this point. I think what you should stick to is supporting the stuff that has already been vetted through a little bit in hopes that that gives it the last little push over the line. Because, you know, as I've said, they've already done a substantial amount of triage to try and, you know, get the list of projects down to a realistic level for the amount of money that they have.
Do you have a sense,
And
Yeah, go ahead, Shanti.
Brian, do you have a sense of whether there's more support for wayfinding or more support for plaque, or you just don't know? I mean, those are two very different things.
I mean, I can talk a little bit with Jamie Rabbit about that tomorrow. He's been the one sitting in the department head meeting, so I don't have personal knowledge of what those discussions have been.
Well, I would suggest we amend our motion to say a house plaque program and a wayfinding. I mean, they're rather than either or.
Yeah.
We would support both, I assume. So I think why not just say we support both?
Yeah, a building plaque program and wayfinding. I support that.
Yeah.
Anyone else on that? All right, so I think we have a second for this.
Second.
So
We had a motion and we had an amendment to that motion, so we need a second on the amended motion. And Shanti can't second her own amended motion.
All right, so I'll second the motion.
Okay.
So I don't know if we need a roll call vote on this. I think if I hear anybody who's opposed to it, anybody opposed? Then why don't we say that we're all for it unanimously? Thank you. I sort of want to move this along too, because I think that does dovetail with this survey effort. And I think the survey effort can be one of our primary things that we focus on. And I think today, if we just have these general discussions about what we want to focus on, then we can begin to think about whether we have a subcommittee or subcommittees to actually work on these things. So let's just keep this conversation going about that. The other items on the list. So Andrew, do you have any thoughts on any other items?
Well, I think this updating of the resources is so important because a lot of the action items that come are listed and they're kind of fall on having this list of resources to work off of. And, you know, I'm particularly taken by action item 1.4.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. You stole mine.
But you know, I'll read it out loud if people don't have it in front of them, but it says review the underlying zoning for each property on the historic resource inventory and assess what resources are most at risk for subdivision or other development pressures that might threaten them. And, you know, to me, that goes, I know it's come up with stone walls and other landscape features when we're talking about rural kind of settings, but you know, I am very concerned about this pressure for developing within the villages and, you know, to keep development centrally located, that it can come at a cost to historic structures. I know when the idea was floated about moving the high school, and the current high school building came into play, um, there's this pressure to develop the property. What happens to the hazard school? I think of all these things, and I don't want to have us, or I'd like as a commission to have some teeth beyond just being advisory, to put the brakes on things when there are pressures where economic development or this idea of developing within the footprint of town center may run contrary to historic preservation. So I want to be set up and in place to deal with that in a way where our opinion is heard and respected. And by getting our resources updated, to me, is very important in that regard.
Yeah. This is very well said, Andrew. Thank you so much. Anyone else on that subject?
Well, it certainly ties to another of the action items, which I have to find, but related to our role in terms of, I think it's action 1-15. No, hold on.
With the EDC?
No, our role with town buildings.
Oh, yes, it's 17.
117, yeah. I mean, it ties into that. And I think you're talking more broadly, Andrew, but just thinking specifically about town buildings modeling good, good behavior, or the town modeling good behavior when it comes to how to treat buildings and properties. I think that would be important, an important first step.
Anyone else thinking about this? I feel like an auctioneer.
Over the years, I've been to enough town council meetings. I realize town council changes every 2 years. There's turnover and all that, but it just seems like the economic engine is what drives, or people are willing to cater to economic development first, and whatever happens second maybe come at that expense.
Right.
And maybe so, because for me it's not an actionable item yet. Can you help me make it actionable? So what exactly are we talking about when we talk about update zoning? Whenever I hear about updating zoning, I start thinking about 5 years from now something might change. It's always so painful. So what can be done, and what is the time frame for making these changes?
Well, that goes to a number of strategies that have been used by other communities. One of the simplest things is to generate a 11 most or 10 most endangered properties list, and to actually get the eyeballs on the properties that are most endangered in a certain area or could be endangered. I think that this kind of review also includes looking at the existing or contemplated zoning and evaluating how damaging or how beneficial that zoning would be to particular resources in a given area. So it's an evaluated process, I think, Murray, based upon what exists in the zoning already, or what has been maybe put forward and contemplated. So there's this great sort of educational component of it, where the commission and members of the commission are able to say, perhaps that in their experience or what they've researched, that particular zoning may be detrimental and or beneficial, and also that they're looking at specific properties as case examples. So let's say you had something like the mill, Peacedale Mill, or Hazard School, and the zoning did not allow for any adaptive use of it. In other words, you couldn't convert it to anything. You had to use the mill as a textile mill forever. And you know that as you do that analysis, the textile mill use is just not viable use perhaps for that building. And so you're basically building into the whole structure a way for that building to be abandoned and to deteriorate and not be used and be a burden and blighted and its downfall. So that's sort of an example of how you would evaluate the zoning and say that you got to do something for the underlying zoning to make this building live and thrive. If the school, for instance, can't be used as a school in the future because of certain deficiencies, how should it be zoned so that it can live again, but not be destroyed in a new use? In other words, you wouldn't want to zone it for an industrial operation. You probably want to zone it for multifamily housing or something that's more, that can be shown to be more beneficial use. And for the commission members to actually begin to understand the parameters of all of this and then be able to advise the planning board and the planning staff and the town council or whomever, the economic development commission, I think is terrific stuff and very valuable for all of us individually in our thoughts about historic preservation. Sort of our own personal growth enters into it as understanding the larger picture and being involved in sort of the greater historic preservation effort. So thank you, Andrew. That is I think, sort of, it's a nice segue from the inventory to know what's important to save and then know that there are dangers to that building or that village or that field or whatever that we've already described as being important. It's sort of the next step that you do. You evaluate what are the chances of this property being destroyed. So the other thing that inventorying can lead to is attention and focus on buildings all of a sudden that were ignored before. So you sort of want to know in advance, if we did get a developer interested in this building because we showcased it, we would want it done. We'd want the development to be beneficial, not be something that would destroy the building itself. So these two things go together really well. I think those are really good targets, along with the placking and the wayfinding. I think that if we focus too on things that we can achieve and be comfortable with and not bite off too much and what's going to have a big impact. Can we weave the educational aspects, think about this, into these, what we've got 2 strong, maybe 3 strong action things to work on. And I want to talk a little bit more, maybe that's another agenda item, but about the awards. Maybe the awards can be woven into this, that we could stick with, that we can actually work on and accomplish and not get too spread out or too unfocused. What do you think? Does that make sense? Karen, I know you're thinking
Yeah,
about this seriously.
No, I think we need to focus because you'll end up boiling the ocean, right? So what's the most impactful thing that we can do and have a little success with, right? And I think the inventory, while we were talking, this is the beauty about Zoom calls, is I was multitasking and I was on Roger Williams' website about internships and possibly calling URI and their history department to see if there's students that we can tap into the fall, maybe to start, making some headway on a village with inventory, right? That can be very pointed. So again, I think to your point, I think we need to nail down 1 or 2 things. I think the inventory can continue to happen in the backdrop, right? And it can get done
Right.
if we're successful with inventory, but with interns, but what else could we do? I was also looking at Action 112. And I feel like it's a little bit broader, but established regular protocol for the Historic District Commission and the EDC to work closely with each other so that economic development and historic preservation policies are shaped toward the same end goals.
Right.
I also feel like it's a little broader though, right? Because it's the whole Michael, it's the whole engine, right? It's the planning and zoning board as well. You know, it's not just EDC. I think that might be a start, but everyone's got to be working toward the same goal.
Yeah, I think you're right on this, and we got a little report I think toward the end of the meeting about Saugatucket Park, but and Brian has more information about that. But this is an area where we're beginning to see the EDC become interested in the historic component of a place. And they are interested in Main Street as well, obviously, seriously interested in Main Street, and have been interested in the connection between the park and Main Street and the river and Main Street. And this to me is a really cool direction that the EDC has taken in the last, I would say in the last 5 years. It's been a steady progression since a planning project was initiated with the landscapes class at URI, which led them down this pathway toward looking at Main Street and the river and the park lands across the river from Main Street. So from my perspective, the door is opening for an interaction, and it'd be marvelous. You can see here under responsible party that for 812, it's the planning department and the town manager's office. But we can certainly convey that we're enthusiastic, if you all agree, we're enthusiastic about that connection.
I think it's also supported through what supposedly was supposed to be the main difference in our approach for the comprehensive plan this go around. When we asked, so what's different? Is this just a regular update? The response from the consultants was, no, this is supposed to be in no longer verticals. We're not going to have these sections of historic versus economic versus natural versus circulation that all sit in their silos. They are all supposed to be intertwined.
Mhm.
So there was an acknowledgement that all of these goals don't sit by themselves, but are related with each other. So I think what Karen is suggesting is also that our organization should not be, in silos. We have to interact with each other in order to accomplish these goals, which themselves are interrelated.
So Brian, maybe you could help us with this on this one, because I'm in agreement. I think maybe the other members are too. How do we get going on moving planning department and the manager into thinking that we could interact with the EDC on projects?
I don't think there really is, any opposition to that I can think of. Certainly, you're always welcome to appear at other board meetings and comment on things of issue that appear on their agendas. There's nothing that prevents you from doing that. Sometimes it's a question of getting the other boards to think beyond their own guardrails, so to speak. I mean, we struggled with the EDC to get them to reach out to the Parks Department, and they're proposing a project on park land, and hadn't even thought that they needed to bring in the Parks Department in order to advance that. I know, Richard, that you helped Susan Marcus and provided her with some information on some of the stuff. Certainly the project has taken a turn from a rather sort of grandiose URI student design vision for the park to something much more connected with its history.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably time to make sure that the HDC is participating as well. And with the EDC now talking about wanting to reach out to the town council for a joint session meeting, my recommendation to the chair has also been to loop in groups like the Historic District Commission, like the Veterans Commission, like the PTO and school-related groups and other stakeholders in Saugatucket Park to make sure that there's a complete discussion of the ideas there.
Ryan, before we talk about this one issue or the one project of the park, I think it's more holistic than that. I think it's just setting up the cadence that we have with the planning department. I know at least one member of the planning department has said, we'd love to have a workshop with the HDC. I don't know if that's a common sentiment amongst the whole board, but I think what we want to do is just improve the way that we're interacting. And maybe that means a yearly workshop with the planning board.
Well, I was just going to say, when you started going that way, that maybe we need to start a practice of having an annual workshop so that we can cross-link some of these boards. And I can bring that up with the planning director.
Yeah, in East Greenwich, we used to do retreats with all the boards and commissions and talk about joint issues. We all get together. They probably violated the open meetings law, but that was a long time ago. But we had training sessions and work sessions so that the boards and commissions could see how each of the other boards and commissions, what their roles were and what they were dealing with and what their views were, et cetera, and have talks. I think that's an excellent idea, Brian. And then I think there may be vehicles like the park to just have discussions with the EDC about. Shanti, you had your hand up, and I'm sorry, I should have.
No, that's okay.
recognized you.
I was going to say action items 1-19 and 1-20, both of which are midterm and long term. They're midterm and long term. They're not short term, but those two items are certainly would, it seems to me, be important and impactful to the EDC, for them to understand the work that's gone into studying the economic benefits of historic preservation and making sure that the EDC is well aware of that research and those findings.
Mm-hmm.
So that they understand when they're making their recommendations for, the economic welfare of the community, they aren't overlooking what is, well established and credible research that indicates that preservation is an economic driver. I mean, if our EDC doesn't know that by now, that would be topic number one, I would think, to bring to their attention.
Yeah, and we could provide or collect the resource material to provide them.
Speaking of resource material, I actually, believe it or not, think action item 1-13 is a hugely important, again, it's midterm, but I mean, I think really updating the Historic District Commission webpage on the town's website with a whole bunch of information that isn't there would put on the map, so to speak, the fact that we exist beyond overseeing certificates of appropriateness in, on 27 properties in Kingston or however many we oversee, and that we actually are an incredible resource. And I think it would be not that difficult to assemble, since every website on earth has some of the same resources. And I have copied them repeatedly at every job and put them on websites. I mean, I just think that makes a show and a statement about the credibility and, value of our town, our district commission.
Yeah. Anybody else on that? Any thoughts?
I think that's low hanging fruit, right? And that's easy to do.
exactly, yeah.
In fact, that's also fundable with the CLG money, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are links to incredible sites,
Oh,
that are
yeah.
local, that are like in Rhode Island, that have all the educational and resource information that we've been just
Yep.
been talking about. It could
Yep.
also have this information that's, I have to tell you that historical resources book that we have basically needs to be decoded, because nobody can and nobody outside of the profession can pick that thing up and read it and understand what it says. It's all over the map in terms of finding where a resource is, or what it's important. I'm sure that even Brian has probably had difficulty. I have difficulty all the time finding stuff in there that I want to find, and I know what's in there. So it would be neat to have that as an item within 1-13, that we could actually decode that thing and get people to, be able to use it properly for their own properties, to understand what they own or what other properties. That's just the existing inventory. Yeah, Brian.
I think that connects back to a lot of what you're talking about in terms of updating the survey to begin with. And if we update it with some, modern electronic helpers to allow people to search it more easily and quickly, it would probably clean that up very quickly. Because like you said, half the problem when using it is trying to find stuff in it. If we have electronic search tools, that would help.
That circles right back to what Carol Baker could help us with in her interns as well, to put it into a GIS map friendly, kind of tool.
Yeah,
So
and she played around with it a bit this afternoon, just really quickly, and there are some things that she can do right now. So she can link to the tax assessor's database based on building age, and she can link into the 911 database for street addresses. But there's limitations to everything that's there right now. So, for example, if she goes into the tax assessor's database, if you have multiple structures on one property, you only get the date for the first structure that appears on the list. You don't get dates for every structure that's on the list.
Right. Those don't have, they're not necessarily accurate either. In many cases, the assessor's information or the building official's information is a little off.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
But she in a matter of 5 minutes was able to, create a map of every structure in town, after like 1500 to 1900 in 10-year increments, and group them all together and, give you a color-coded list of properties throughout town.
Interesting.
But like I said, there's limitations to what she can do, and certainly none of that includes, the more modern additions that might be eligible for preservation at this point.
Right. So I think we do want to move along here, so we're out by 7, certainly. So I think what we have is a number of items here that we need to sort of sort on and record, with the thought that we would pick some of the drivers and then have these sort of ancillary things tagged onto them. And I think for all of you, what would be great to do is really think about what would be the structure? How would we work on these things? How could we work on these things individually or in groups of 2, perhaps, no more than 2, outside or during the month and we're not meeting outside of the meeting. Can we do that, Brian? That's a big question too, under the open meetings law. But how can we actually have working groups to assemble information and report back? So you'll have to help us with that aspect.
Yeah, so, Open Meetings Act, any group that is a quorum of the board constitutes a public meeting, which needs to be advertised. So, nothing prevents, a couple of you from getting together over coffee and sitting down and going through this stuff and talking about it and then reporting back to the board with ideas or concepts on how to proceed.
And if we had people meeting or thinking about this between our meetings and thought they wanted to forward information to you about their desire or their thoughts, could they send that to you, Brian? Then you could distribute it to all of us.
You can always send it to me, and I can get it out there in a form that allows other people to think about it. You can't discuss it amongst yourselves at that point, because then you have an idea that's come from one member and gone to all of the members. And now if you start talking about it amongst yourselves, you might run into trouble. So once I send something out for everybody to consider, you should really limit yourself to discussing that in a public meeting. But I can distribute the information.
Interesting. That might be a way that we can have people giving feedback just for the thought process when we're not having a meeting in Zoom or in person. So I think maybe what we'll do for the next meeting, and maybe we'll get this information out ahead of that, is to sort of prioritize these a little bit and send you out a list. And maybe there can be like a sign-up list that you would, choose to put your name against if you wanted to work on something specific, and also to comment about it, whether we've really done our homework and put it together the way you thought it came out in this discussion. That's sort of what I have in mind, so that we can keep on moving. Is there any thoughts about that? Am I on the right track? Sort of in agreement that that's a way to move it forward?
Good. I'd like to confirm, and I probably should have looked at the whole comp plan to get this information, but short-term, midterm, long-term, how much time are each of those anticipated?
I don't know the answer to that either. I think they're general characterizations that, short term should be relatively quick, sort of low hanging fruit, and then midterm, long term, more involved, more planning required, more complexities in implementing. I think that's the way they're laid out.
I also got the impression, and you may think about this, let's say for instance, action item 116, which is the hub thing, that we serve as a hub for information. It's a long term on the horizon, but it seems to me that it's constant. When they say long term, it means we're going to be doing this all the time, forever. Right. That's the way I took it. So there's a little bit of vagueness in the long term. What does that really mean? I think that we have wanted to be the hub for information, and that 117 says that we're going to be a hub too, and that's short term.
Well,
so I know it goes on. It's more complex, 117. So with that, I think we probably want to move on to the other items on the agenda. Is there anything more you want to bring up under A? Because we have touched base. We want to touch base to with B and C under number 5. So have we done A? All right, so let's move
Richard, I
on.
just have a question.
Yeah, Linda.
Action 1.5. How do, I think that's a very good idea, but I don't know how does that be implemented?
1.5.
Yeah,
I think that what can happen within the subdivision regulations is that the planning board can choose to have the applicant pay for experts to do specific analysis. Could be a traffic analysis, could be a drainage analysis, could be some other kind of, usually the environmental driven analysis, but maybe the traffic is a good example. So in this case, you could actually say under that provision of the review process that you would include historical or archaeological survey work as well, particularly if there was an important building or a known historical cemetery or some other kind of aspect that prompted. Let's say the Narragansett tribe came to the meeting or wrote a letter to the meeting saying that this was important Native American site or village, or had some ceremonial purpose, and the developer was not really thinking that at all, and you needed clarification, you needed to have a study done. The planning board could compel under their regulations, could compel the applicant to actually hire a third-party consultant to do the evaluation. I think this is a little broader, which says that perhaps a planning board would go out and hire somebody and straighten out later what the expenses were for that, but would have the authority to actually move ahead and hire somebody to come in and provide the evaluation. Brian probably has some more on that.
Yeah, I think you had it correct initially, Richard. You know, when the planning board or the planning department doesn't have the expertise in-house to address a particular question, we have the ability to require an applicant to hire experts who can conduct those evaluations. Right. So, you know, the issue out on Curtis Corner Road with the cemetery is a good example. While the applicant in that case agreeably went out and hired public archaeological laboratories to do some work out there, the planning board had the ability to compel them to do that as well. In Coventry, when we had a bunch of issues come up involving negative impacts from the wind turbines there, we were able to compel people to go out and hire you know, acoustical engineers and other resources that, you know, very specific, not the things that a town normally has the capacity to evaluate.
Right.
What is it that makes it a midterm goal? I mean, this is where my frustration comes in a little bit, and it applies to this next item around demolition as well.
Yeah.
It seems so straightforward, and yet we've been talking about these things forever. Why can't we just get it done?
Well, that's an excellent question, Brian, for you. Is what if the Historic District Commission was really wanted to move ahead on something in the midterm sooner rather than later?
I think these are recommendations. I don't think you're necessarily, you know, locked into picking off all the short-term stuff, then moving on to the midterm and then moving on to the long-term. You might get, you know, a little pushback from the planning director at some point if you're too all over the map, but I don't think you're, you know, roped into a particular order. So if you're placing more importance on certain items than the comp plan does, or you think that they're easier to accomplish than was maybe assumed when this was written, then then by all means.
Well, I'm with Murray on this, because I just looked up in the comp plan what these actually mean. So short term is 1 to 5 years, mid implementation 1 to 5 years, midterm 6 to 10 years, and long term is 11 to 20 years. You know, those timeframes to me are just, for some of this stuff, just, I mean, why we would wait 6 years to move on something that is not that difficult. For example, action 1-13, why the time frame of that would be 6 to 10 years from now. It seems sort of, I mean.
Well, because it actually, Shanti, you're right, that those federal and state programs are now, we don't know what the hell they're going to be in 6 to 10 years. They probably won't exist then. There'll be something different. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like, yeah, I think it's all within the framework of what the planning staff can accomplish. And maybe it's a different way. Maybe there's a different way of looking at this. If we can help accomplish things, we can move them up the ladder.
Mhm.
It's all about time and energy and staffing capability. But we could, I think, I love the idea of being able to just have a discussion about something that maybe in our framework, we can see that we're sort of operating on several different levels, and that one of those levels can be moved up to a short term very easily. The thing about, you know, because you already have the framework for the planning board to actually have a consultant come in to look at a specific environmental need, or in the term, they're already doing it for cemeteries in terms of an archaeologist. It seems to me that doesn't have to wait for 6 years. It's already almost there. It's
Right.
probably actually already there in the way they can do what they do. So,
Rich, maybe I'm missing something, and this is addressing, using the demolition item as an example. Is it not simple enough for us to make a suggestion? It's probably 2 lines, 2 sentences to cover the best of a demolition clause that gets forwarded to the planning board. The planning board reviews it in their succession of meetings, 2 or 3 meetings, public review, and it goes through the approval process. I don't see.
I agree.
Why this takes so long.
I agree.
well, it's worth a try. And I you know, we just see what happens with our ability to actually construct something, and move it forward.
We should be persistent on this, because we're going to just lose another property or 2.
Yeah, right.
And that's in the very short term. Like, it's
So
just
that,
happening. It's
I agree.
happening all around us. I didn't realize, but the old farmhouse here where I live, right, the old farmhouse on Kenyon, they dropped the carriage house that was in the back.
oh my goodness. I didn't
Yep.
know.
And now we're putting a new home back there.
Wow.
And that's out of sight, out of mind, you know?
Right. Well, I think that's sort of a segue to the demolition. Why don't we just move on to that and talk about it in more detail? You know, that since the Larchwood, this has been what really was on everybody's minds, and then it sort of like faded. And I don't know, it is possible for one of us to actually get a good demolition delay ordinance. I mean, a lot of communities have them, and push it forward. You know, we can get a draft before us, and then we could talk about it as a commission, review it, and then forward it to the planning board through the staff with recommendation that, you know, this, even though I think there's an action item for it, we just move it forward and say, look, you know, we've already waited. It should have been done right after the Larchwood was demoed.
Right.
In the kerfuffle over that, which was significant. There was a lot of community support for something like this, realizing what happened with the Larchwood.
Thank you, and my apologies for the emotion, but you nailed it. It's connected to, previous experiences, and too much time has gone by.
Right. And just see what happens. I'm all for that. How about the rest of you? Should we do that?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So I have a number of resources that I've put together in looking around about this. I'll be more than glad to circulate them to everybody. That there are a number of considerations to go into, how exactly do you want to shape this? I mean, do you simply want a very simple delay ordinance? Do you want the HDC do you want it to be a demolition review ordinance with the HDC weighing in on some avenue or some approach? And if you do take on a review capacity, what is it that the decision you're going to make is? What will that mean in terms of, whether or not something gets demolished or not?
Right.
Sometimes it's simply enough to have a delay with a public notification so that the community becomes aware that something's going to happen, and maybe the HDC doesn't need to make a decision. But maybe you do want to step in and take a look at the property and make a determination of historical significance. And then, like I said, the question is, well, what does that mean for the property owner at that point?
So, Brian, I take it then that you already have some collected information about this.
Yeah, I found I found some papers, guidance materials from Massachusetts and Connecticut about the ordinances. Newport has an ordinance, but it's really an all-around demolition ordinance. It's not strictly speaking a historic resource ordinance, although that is built into it a little bit. When I saw that, I did go and speak with the building official to see whether he had any interest in a larger, more expansive town demolition ordinance. We don't have one right now. You do have to apply to the building official in order to demolish something, but right now there's no town regulation that guides that decision-making process. The building official simply relies on the state demolition codes.
Right. Yeah, the only thing we have is we have our demolition review in Kingston Village.
In the district, yes.
In the district. Well,
Yes,
I think what we should do is maybe, is there somebody on the commission who would really like to follow through on this as an assignment?
I've got the least credentials, but I'm happy to contribute if needed.
Right.
I'll send you the materials. I'll send them to everybody.
So Shanti will help too. So maybe that's the little committee, the two of you. And
Sure.
if you can connect with Brian on that, he can share with you what he's already found out. And I think that's a discussion we can have about the ins and outs and the pitfalls of what Brian's has outlined, the two types or the three types of demolition.
Right, there are different options, and I think we'd want to actually look at all of them, sort of present the range,
Right.
and see which one is palatable.
Okay, all right. Everybody in agreement with that? I think that's a good thing.
Here.
Okay, good. Let's move on to the preservation awards. I know that's been on our agenda for a while in past years, and this year we couldn't do anything with COVID really, but now I think we can. And so I think we had talked about in the past that perhaps people would think about opportunities for awards. Karen, you were very, very much involved with this in the past. I know your time is really tough right now, but I thought these things really worked in terms of good PR, and they were fun to do. So let me think, Andrew, were you involved in the past too, or was this new to
No,
you?
that
This
was
is-
new to me.
Yeah, and I think Shanti and Murray didn't have. So it's really just Karen and Linda and myself left to
Yep.
remember this. But what we were doing was we were just selecting outside of it could be inside the district, but it could be outside. We were more thinking outside
Mhm.
of significant properties. It could be modest properties. And I think we thought that they didn't have to be pure, historic preservation projects that had to meet all the Secretary of Interior standards and whatnot. Just something that seemed to resonate as a property that the homeowners or the property owners had taken some care of and put some money into and done a good job. And Bicycle Bills was one that we made an award with, and also the
Wing.
Arnold's project on Main Street. Those are just examples. I thought in the process, it was fascinating to talk to the owners and to hear the stories. What happened, what prompted them to do what they did. Arnold's, I think, was so exciting because the intervention that prompted them to do what they did was somebody sending them a historical photograph or postcard of what it looked like. And it was as simple as that. It wasn't a lecture about historic windows and what you should do about historic windows, or storefronts and what you should do about storefronts. It was just this wonderful image. And then Bicycle Bills, has a legacy of being a bicycle shop for so long, for 100 or more years. It's just really quite incredible. And
There also an opportunity for us to, again, trying to achieve that goal of public participation.
yeah,
Does it have to be just us, or can we pull the public into a voting system or some way to get them involved?
well, that's a good consideration. Just adds more
Nominations.
complexity to it.
Yeah.
We could do nominations. I mean, we could
Right.
seek nominations. A lot of communities do that.
Yeah, it was kind of, I think we did have a discussion long ago about this and the fact that we didn't want to get involved in turning somebody who was nominated down. We didn't want to say no, I guess.
Well, the fact is, I think we all have probably observed there are actually, I think, a number of obvious good candidates. I mean, when it's not like we're short of options, in my
Yeah.
view. I've seen on Columbia Street, High Street,
Yep.
a couple of, the extension of Bicycle Bills. I mean, there are a number of things that have happened that would be a rich pool without even having to go outward right now. I think
Right.
sometimes you go outward because you can't come up with enough of a pool on your own.
What we tried to do was think about residents as well as businesses. So that's what we tried to do.
Yep. I think we still have a good mix this year. I've made a little list.
So I think everybody then, I get the feeling that we'd all like to do this again. We'd like to have an awards maybe this summer if we can get some nominations in. And then how many, I mean, didn't we do like 4?
We
It
did
wasn't
3.
3.
We did the property that was closest to the Kingston district that Peter suggested.
Mm-hmm.
Is on Mossfield Road.
Moorefield Road.
The-
Yeah.
the big white house right on by Broad Rock.
Right.
Right.
Right, the
And then we
farmhouse.
did Stedman's and we did Arnold. We did 3, I believe.
Right.
And
Well-
we had the photographer in front of the town hall with each of the business owners.
Yeah, I have that picture actually.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was a great time, really was. And we got some good PR out of it. So
And we gave them, did we give them a plaque? A home?
we gave them a certificate. We had
A
these funny little
certificate.
certificates, but
Yeah.
it does make sense. Think about this. It makes sense that maybe we give them a plaque for their house.
Mm, mm.
We talked about that, right? And then we ran into funding.
There's a funding problem.
Yeah,
Mm,
that's what I remember.
mm.
Yeah, where
Yeah.
we weren't able to find the funds in the budget.
Right.
I'll pay
But
for
we
it.
can ask again.
What did you say, Murray?
I said, I'll pay for it. It's relatively little money. I'll pay for it.
Good. Well, maybe we can raise the money ourselves. It's yeah, they're different. I mean, that's another issue. It's like, what's the plaque look like and how do we make it and blah, blah, blah. But I don't want to rule it out. It's kind of fun. The choices that people have had are these wooden plaques that are painted, or they get the bronze plaque that's made, or the aluminum plaque. But I think the painted ones are really charming, actually.
Wouldn't that be that's the start of the plaque program now, isn't
yeah, yeah, it could be. It could be. We could start the plaque.
it?
And
How do I get a plaque? I want a plaque. No, I want a plaque.
yeah. And of course, then, it can morph. It doesn't have to be, the plaques don't have to be down the road for all the beautiful projects that have been done. We can put plaques on houses that are just there. But starting out, well, think about it. Think about it as rather than the little certificate. Their certificates were nice. They were okay. And maybe there's something else that could be given, that's like a certificate, like a paper frame thing that is, that's just as cool.
I
as a
like the plaque idea, though. That would generate some jealousy.
Yeah, because they'd have something on their building.
Yeah, right. It could.
Yeah.
You should distinguish the award winner plaques from
Right.
your normal plaque, they get a special brass medallion or something on their plaque if they were picked for a preservation award.
Like 2 stars or something.
Sweet. That's a good
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
I like that.
Right. So I think I like the painted plaque. Now, a friend of mine up in Warwick, in Patuxent Village, I'm going to be with him tomorrow. He did a plaque program, and I can find out how it was a painted plaque. It was really simple.
The details.
The details are, the monster hiding behind the bush, but
Right.
still, I think he did a very simple. He found a vendor who could do plaques, and they were simple.
I bought one for my house, and it came from Pennsylvania or something.
Yeah.
Already done.
Was that a
So-
foundry one? Was that like a metal?
It's painted. It's painted,
Oh,
and it
it's
just
painted.
has the name of the house and the year, the
Oh,
name
neat.
of the owner. Yeah.
Neat. So you found a person
Mhm.
online who can just do it. Wow.
Mhm.
Well, that would be great to know about.
Yeah, I'll have to Google it, see if the person's still around that does. I got it probably close to 10 years ago.
Right. So does anybody want to work on the award, sort of we're just talking about 2 people here to work on the awards and get it all sort of gymmed up again.
I can contribute.
Okay.
Mari, you want to do it together?
Sure, yeah.
All right, good.
Right, I don't want to preclude anybody else from joining as well.
I think we should all send in to Brian our the house or the business, the address. So Brian is the clearinghouse for getting information, distributing it back to everybody. On, each of us can nominate, and then we can have a discussion about
Let's
that.
set a deadline for that.
Yeah, we should.
And just to have a timeline here
Do you want to set at the end of July for that?
for the nominations or for the awards.
Well, I'm thinking it's almost the end of June now in my head. So for the nominations, and then we would, for the next meeting, maybe, if we have a meeting.
So if you want to get me lists for, 3rd week in July or something like that, we have a meeting, I think, what is it, August 4th would be your regular quarterly meeting in August.
Okay.
Right. And then if
Um,
the committee can figure out, the ifs and buts about the plaque and how much those would cost and the time frame to get them done. Because it'd be neat to do the award in the fall, I think, sometime early fall. I'm just thinking about people's attention, eyeballs
Yep.
on paper, stuff
Yep.
like that. It's sort
And
of
if
like back
there's-
to school time.
If there's somebody with an artistic or creative bent, somebody should be thinking of a design, something, that signifies this as a town recognized structure, and an overall design for a plaque program in some way to specialize that for your award winners.
And will you find out and let Maury and I know if there's any funds in any budget? Because that could kill the plaque program.
The thing right now, like I said, is that the plaque program idea is in that COVID budget. So long as it continues to survive the triage process, you could well have a chunk of money in there for plaques. And while you may not be in a position to do a complete list, you can certainly do the most recognizable, start with a certain group of locations for plaques, and then just continue to chew on it as time goes past, and try and pick up everything else when the COVID money runs out.
Yeah, interesting. Well, here's some thought as to how, sort of like Doris Duke's project in Newport, you start, one renovation in each of the neighborhoods because it spreads. So maybe in our nominations, we think about different areas, not all in one area, but different areas. Just think about it a little bit, how you could spread the plaque program through this and have the different types of plaques, the award-winning plaque and the sort of basic plaque. But not too much of a difference between award-winning and basic, because we want to give out plaques.
We talked about us submitting nominations. Did I also hear support for community nominations? And if so, then there needs to be some more definition around the criteria.
Yeah, I think at this point, let's do it amongst ourselves, Marie, to get it off the ground, because I think that's putting another layer on it that we want to really think through carefully. I like the idea, but I think it could stop us from moving forward quickly.
Can also end up being a lot of work. I mean, I think we
Yeah.
have to be cognizant of a number of these things that we've been talking about, including the survey. Sound easy because it's like interns can do this, but the oversight of that type of thing is pretty substantial.
Yeah.
And
I think the award program, though, we can manage it if it's simple right now. And then I think these other things, Brian and I are going to put the outline together that, sort of puts them in order as to what we're going to bite on and digest.
So, Brian, this all sounds like interesting or, good content for a web page, our website. Who is the keeper and designer of the town's website?
That would be Lori Fox. The planning department does have some level of access to make changes to the web page, but we are locked out of some functions. Let me talk to Jay Parker. He's done a whole lot with some of the planning web pages, some components of the planning department main page to put more information up there, and maybe he can show me a little bit about what he's done to add a little bit more depth to the historic district page.
Great.
All right, let's move on. I think we've got that under control. Number 6 is correspondence and public comments. Do we have any correspondence, Brian?
I don't have any correspondence.
And I don't know if there are anybody in the public out there that wants to comment? Do we have anybody listening in?
Yeah, we have one attendee. I'm not sure if she has anything, if she wants to raise her hand and make any comments, she can. If not, we'll move on.
So that's, is that Susan Axelrod out there?
Yes.
Susan, if you do have any comments, please raise your hand. If not, we'll
Okay.
move ahead.
No, she got her hand up, so let me let her in. And you're in, Susan. If
You
you'll
have to
just
unmute.
unmute yourself. There you
Hello,
go.
Hi,
Hi,
Susan.
Susan.
I
just
see.
want to say thank you, and I'm just watching, and you guys are awesome, and I have nothing to contribute.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, thank you for being our public. We always enjoy public participation.
I think that your work, the work items you're choosing are excellent. It's just great. You guys are great.
Thank you. Thank you. Of course,
And if you were interested in historic plaques, we replaced about 20 of them here in the village. Those are mahogany that were hand painted, but we used Uxbridge carvers, and he has retired. But
Oh.
they were hand painted mahogany, and they were about $100 a piece. And it was simply the text of the name of the house along with the year it was built. So just to give you an idea of what that cost for hand painted signs, they were $100 a piece.
mm,
That tracks with what we did when I was at Newport Restoration Foundation. We had a guy in North Kingstown whose name I'm not going to remember, and he did, beautiful, beautiful hand painted wood signs, but they're pricey. I think they were, they were over 100 a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah,
We were
I
doing-
think-
Is it?
We were doing them in batches of 10, so I think he gave us a little discount, but yeah,
Right.
they were not cheap.
Right.
okay. Well, it's going to be good to find out what we can. So guys, I hope you can, get some other quotes or ideas from.
I found one for $99 and up.
Yeah, the accessibility of modern CNC fabrication stuff too,
Yeah.
may make that less expensive
Yeah.
to obtain now.
Yeah, inscribed AZEC, or done with a,
Laser.
there's a laser thing. There's a maker's, what do they call it? A maker space at URI. That's interesting. They're doing incised signs and such with this. I'll have to get you some information about that. Maybe they're doing it on a contract basis. Maker space. All right, moving on. I think you've already given us a lot on Saugatucket Park, Brian. I don't know if you need to say anything more about that.
Yeah, let me say a little bit more. I mean, because some of the other members may not be as up on it as you are, Richard. So back in 2018, the EDC contracted with URI for a senior studio design project looking at the riverfront, and one of the projects that came out of there looked at Saugatucket Park and had some rather large ideas, including a big amphitheater development and whatnot. And the EDC was looking at moving forward with some sort of park improvement / economic development project. Unbeknownst to the EDC, the Parks Department had already secured some grant funding to do some work on pathways and fencing and invasive removal along the river. So they teamed up with the Parks Department to take a larger look at the whole park. They brought in a volunteer landscape architect, Randy Collins, to put together some conceptual plans. Richard provided them with the drawings from the Olmsted brothers who originally laid out the park. the existing park is actually not that far off. And so the proposals going forward at this point are to tweak it a little bit to bring it back into conformity with the original design, improve some of the streetscape, maybe along High Street. And I think the design originally included a stone wall along the road and trees. We may have lost a lot of the trees if they were all Norway maples. They are all diseased and probably came down. And they're also looking at improving the connectivity to the bike path and improving drainage coming off of the site and getting a little stormwater management and treatment before it heads into the river. For anybody who's interested, the Recreation Commission has this on their agenda for Monday, the 21st. If you're interested in watching or participating in that discussion. And after they have that discussion, probably at the next EDC meeting in July, there will be a discussion about, bringing this in front of to a joint work session with the town council, with the EDC and the Recreation Commission. They were looking to try and get that joint work session sometime before the end of July. So that's basically where it stands at the moment. I am going to meet with Erica Luke over at South County Historical Society tomorrow, and one of the things they asked me to do is to see if they have any photographic record of that end of High Street at or before the time the park was done, right, to see if we can see what was there.
So Brian, I will forward you. Erica sent me just today that they had done research on the Mars collection. This is the collection of photographs that were photographed by Mr. Mars in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, before he died. And they have found lots of streetscape, not a huge number, but a number that's good, of High Street and the park. And the photographs show a line of trees, really substantial trees, right down High Street on that border. And they also show the trees with the telephone wires coming up through them. So you can imagine what happened over time. Trees probably got diseased. It came down. Murray's just showing something, looks like a postcard of the school and the chestnut tree, which stood there about where the Veterans Memorial is now. That shows up in some of these photographs too, I think. Very, very interesting stuff. I just wanted to add this discussion so everybody knows about it. If you remember, Karen was part of the commission, and Linda, I think the rest of you were not on the commission, but we deliberated over it was a CLG grant to look at the Wakefield Historic District more in depth. You remember that, Karen and Linda, I'm sure. And out of that came recommendations for extension of the district on Robinson and up to Stedman's, to Bicycle Bills, on to the Columbia Street intersection. And those amendments, linear amendments to extension at the east end of the district were made. David Gates went into sort of consideration about the old post office and having that listed. And finally, after due diligence and reviewing everything, decided that he would like to have the old post office listed, which is now up for another amendment to the district, and it's being processed by the Preservation Commission in Providence. And what they have said about Saugatucket Park is that actually they did consider adding that to the Wakefield district when these amendments were first considered, and they would consider that again right now, and include it with the old post office amendment. So they are standing by waiting for the town to make a decision about whether or not to actually have Saugatucket Park, because it's an Olmsted Brothers design, listed with the Wakefield district. So I don't know if you knew that, Brian, but that's sort of something that's operational that I think the Rex Everly knows about it, the Recreation Commission, and the members of the working group that Randy Collins and his team know about it. But it would be wonderful, I think, from a fundraising point of view alone, to have the park listed in the National Register. And I think it's such an incredible thing that we actually have an Olmsted Brothers Park in Wakefield. It's like a jaw dropper, actually, that it ever happened. And that puts us in league with Westerly's Wilcox Park in some respects. This is a very tiny park, but the design did include the river, which Westerly does not have. And so it's kind of cool. It's a very, and Brian's right. There's not much difference between the Olmsted design and what exists today. The integrity is, I think, that's my opinion, is there. The trees, we've lost some trees, but the nature of the park, the walking park, the bowl, that's all what the Olmsted Brothers designed. And it was our Kingston person, Vernon Helm, who was the lead contact with the town. So that was also very cool. And we have his correspondence with the Olmsted Brothers firm. So anyway, that's the story. And I'm just waiting on pins and needles to hear what happens, whether the town actually decides to go ahead. I kind of regret the fact that when we first looked at it, Karen and Linda probably remember this, that we didn't say, yes, go ahead, put the park in there. Because it was on our table. It was right before us.
How would the addition of the park to the historic district influence some of the projects that the EDC is considering, like putting a what do you call it, a amphitheater of sorts squat down the middle of it? I mean, that seems to go counter against, the design. Original design.
That's not part of the plan anymore, Murray. I think once they realized that this was a historic park with a connection to Olmsted, they really sort of abandoned that in favor of preserving what's there. So that large sort of infrastructure concept is no longer part of the project.
I think what was really exciting for me was the EDC shift in, once they learned that it was an Olmsted Park and it had historical importance, they began to shift. And it was, I think they were concerned anyway about the magnitude of the disturbance that would take place if they followed the students' design. And I think their landscape architect consultant is also saying that this is a little too ambitious. But
and the town engineer as well. So.
Yes. So it was on all fronts sort of welcomed that, oh, we have something that's more important that we should look after and save. So think about that. Think about that as a wonderful kind of addition to Main Street and a perspective on Main Street and how our commission can be aligned with the Economic Development Commission on the same purpose, and it all makes sense. So I think this is very good stuff. Well, with that, we're very close to the end. It is getting on. It's getting late. We gotta.
Do you want me to update you quickly on Curtis Corner?
Yeah, I think we
very brief.
Yep.
So I did ask about this last week. We have not heard back on an official report from the Public Archaeology Laboratory. I do know that they were out on the site and that they did some scraping. They found evidence of graves in terms of changes in soil in the area. They did not find any evidence of remains still on site. So I think the suspicion is that that the remains were moved to other locations, but I'll have to wait and see when we get the final report on that. So that's where that stands.
And I'm assuming that the planning board will get all of that information so they can make a decision.
Yeah, they still have to approve the final plan on that development, and I'm sure they're not going to do that until that's been resolved, because it's going to wind up incorporating some sort of change to the design, even if it's just specifying that a wall be put around the area with a note that, you know, there was a cemetery here, because they'll never be positive that that all the remains have been removed absent a much more extensive and intrusive examination.
All right. And you all understand that this was permitted. It's called a comprehensive permit. When we have such a permit for affordable housing before us, it's comprehensive because the planning board does all the permitting. And we would normally look at this if it wasn't a comprehensive permit as a commission, because it's within our jurisdiction then. But because it's a comprehensive permit, it is not. It's no longer within our jurisdiction to review it. So
I would also note that it appears to be a legitimate mistake and not any sort of intentional cover-up. We did find that there, while the site was noted in the Historic Cemetery Commission database, that for some reason or another, it was not carried over into the Regis database, which is probably what got checked when they were doing their research for the plat.
Very interesting. Well, thank you, Brian. I think moving on, our next regular meeting date is August 5th. We've talked about that, and that we'll have some of these reports by then. We have our nominations in by then, and we'll be talking about that. And I think what we want to do is probably keep that meeting date. That's a regular meeting date. We'll be hopeful that the scene has quieted down in Kingston on projects, perhaps, and we will be able to have more discussions about what these other projects we want to do, and not a project review. But we will not know that until later. So with that, I think it's time for an adjournment. Actually, we've sort of run over a bit here, and we all have something else to do. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
All right, Karen makes a motion.
Second.
Shanti seconds. I
All
think
in
we
favor.
don't need a roll call. Nobody's objecting to this. All in favor, raise your hands. Yay. Thank you. Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you
Night.
for
Thank you.
all you're doing. And good night, guys.
Thank you.
Stay
Good night.
safe.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.